Welcome everyone to today's vlog. I'm really excited to introduce you to Sam and Liz, who I've already been chatting to offline about their fantastic study. Welcome.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your paper?
Sure. I'll go first? Sure.
Go for it.
So my name's Sam Calder. I'm a teaching and research academic at the University of Tasmania with an ongoing affiliation with Curtin University. Also a clinician and a clinical educator and the early career rep for the International Collaborative Network of N of 1 designs and single case experimental designs. So most of my clinical and research interests have been concentrated on DLD. Liz, did you want to jump in with your intro? And then
surely.
Take it away.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Liz Hill. I'm like Sam, a teaching and research academic here at Curtin University over in Perth. Most of my research has been in child and adolescent language and literacy with links, so the intersection between child and language and mental health, and looking at the long-term outcomes of language difficulties in teenagers.
Fantastic. And I've loved both of your research over the years, so thank you for continuing to publish. But tell us a little bit about this paper that you've just published on prevalence data.
Sure thing. So we used the Raine Study data, which is the longest running prospective birth cohort study in the Southern Hemisphere.
So cool.
And it's currently in generation 3. So it's actually the offspring of the participants that we were investigating and who are the offspring of the mothers who are enrolled in the study. So we used the data and applied the contemporary diagnostic criteria for DLD that came out of the Catalyze Consortium as best as possible to estimate the, or provide an estimate of the prevalence of DLD at 10 years, so in middle childhood, where most studies have looked at much younger. And the richness of this data set really allowed us to look carefully at the carefully selected variables to look at the risk factors for later DLD.
Fantastic.
Nice.
Liz, anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of draw on that focus at 10 years. So, you know, like Sam said, most of prevalent studies have looked at early childhood, but by looking at 10 years, we, you know, can show the prevalence estimates are consistent into later and middle childhood, which is pretty unique.
It does persist, yes.
Yeah, as I'll say to many people listening in, that it's lifelong, it's ongoing condition. They don't grow out of it, which is fantastic, because as you're right, a number of prevalent studies have been in those early years, and unfortunately, at least clinically, and I have to go look at the research on this one, we know that diagnosis for DLD is often relatively late for some young people, particularly depending on the services that you're interacting with. So obviously, this is a really unique sort of Australian, well, it is an Australian first paper. What were your key findings?
So the key findings is probably the estimate of prevalence, which is at 6.4%. So quite similar to previous studies that estimated around 7%. And like we said, it's at middle childhood. So it equates to roughly 2 in every mainstream classroom of 30, so which is consistent. And like I said, we applied contemporary diagnostic criteria, but it was limited to demonstrably lower language than age-matched peers and non-verbal IQ that was either above average, average, or in the low average range. So we weren't able to look at functional impact or early onset because of the limitations in the data set. But this has spurred some future directions that are already in motion that we're really excited about. But we also found that there's no difference distribution between males and females with DLD. And this is, again, consistent with previous epidemiological studies in the US and UK, which is important because we tend to see more males accessing clinical services than females. And this has been represented in the literature as well. Liz, do you want to speak a little bit about the risk factors?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we wanted to look at prevalence, but we also wanted to look at some of the early developmental and environmental risk factors for meeting criteria of language disorder at 10. And we used past research to kind of inform the variables that we were interested in. And, you know, like all, I think, good research does, it answered some questions, but raised more. So some things that we know we want to look into a little bit deeper based on our results is this link to smoking. And Sean, you mentioned that in the chat before the recording started today, that, you know, we've got evidence to suggest that perhaps smoking in utero increases the likelihood that a child will meet criteria at 10. Obviously not wanting to dive into a causal link there, but there's something about that association that we need to look at a little bit deeper. Then also thinking about the presence of the variable was a father at home, you know, whether a father was at home or not, and whether that's got something to do with the number of communication partners that a child has around them during that critical period for language development, and also exposure to books and exposure to written and oral language early on.
Yeah, and some of that is really, I guess, reaffirming, you know, some of the things we know, but some really interesting findings that have come out, and I guess things for us to consider. So I guess my next question would be, for those of us who are listening, whether we're clinicians or family members or researchers, what would be some of your key messages?
Sure. So this won't be news, I think, to any of your listeners, but DLD is prevalent in middle childhood, is as prevalent in middle childhood as it is in early childhood, suggesting that it's persistent. Therefore, a high number of kids are likely to have DLD and go on to have difficulties socially, academically, and vocationally. And given the referral bias that we observe, parents, carers, teachers, and others that notice language difficulties early on, especially in girls, should be vigilant in accessing speech pathologists to confirm concerns and provide those necessary supports. And like Liz said, we looked at carefully selected variables as potential risk factors that have been investigated in previous literature. And we explored these as a way to identify if any risk factors could be leveraged into protective factors. So if lower literacy environment was a risk factor, this is something that SLPs can actually influence by providing educational opportunities for creating enriched early literacy environments. But we found that smoking while pregnant was the only risk factor, which, you know, we can't do a lot about that. But what we can do is it does add weight to existing public health messages to avoid smoking, especially while expecting. Did you have anything to add, Liz?
Just one small thing. I guess it's just a plug for the amazing work that Sean and your team and others are doing, being able to sort of raise awareness and really accessible information about DLD, and knowing that that information is out there for families and other professionals who work with children, just to become more informed about the condition and how to identify kids who might be having some difficulties.
And I love the point that you've raised about the gender. You know, often boys might be picked up or, you know, identified as being, you know, later in their communication milestones and things like that. But we're actually seeing, you know, it present in boys and girls. And it's something I think that we've seen in the autism research moving forward, is that what do these young people look like? And perhaps actually women and girls with DLD might actually be presenting differently. And we've spent so much time researching these young boys and men. So I think really exciting opportunities, but also opens a whole, you know, suite of questions around, well, what are the girls and women looking like? So really cool. Love this research. As we wrap up, is there just anything else you'd like to add? Any final thoughts?
I would just like to add that we're really thankful for the interest in this study so far. It's been a wild ride, and hopefully the study sets a foundation for future research aimed at raising awareness of DLD and improving outcomes for those living with the condition as well as their families. So really, like you said, unpacking what, especially girls, what it looks like when these girls have DLD and how they're presenting, because we just, even in research, we see there's a huge bias having boys involved in studies, boys referred for clinical services. So really unpacking what that looks like. And really my hope is that we don't have to provide a definition of DLD every time it's mentioned to the general public. So
wouldn't that be nice?
On par with other childhood conditions, you know, like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, it'd be great if people just knew what DLD was.
Yeah.
I guess I will add to that as well, just to watch this space. You know, Sam and I are working with a great team of researchers at Telethon Kids Institute to still leverage and work with the Raine data to start to look forward for those participants. So what are the academic, social, emotional and vocational outcomes for these kids who met criteria for language disorder, so we can start to tease apart the functional kids in more detail.
Amazing.
So watch this space.
Can't wait. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today, and we look forward to sharing the word about your research with everybody that's listening in.
Thanks so much,
Sean. And thank you for all the work that you do in this space. It's incredible.
Happy to.